mindfulness alone is incomplete to reach an awareness. Awareness involves the sphere of human thought, the noosphere. I suggest we also need the practice of knowfulness, which is a neologism. So what is knowfulness? Knowfulness is a relational state of consciousness in which we are actively aware of the present, questioning new things, and bringing them into context. And the first step to practice knowfulness is solitude. Solitude is not loneliness. In loneliness, you isolate yourself from the world. In solitude, you are together with your thoughts. Solitude is a counterintuitive experience of being in someone's presence, becoming aware of one's deepest thoughts and impulses, enabling an unparalleled experience of unity with nature. I see most people in the subway, heads down, consumed by their small screens, and I see a mindless landscape of thoughts being controlled by others through technology. When I see people contemplating a sunset, looking at their screen to register the moment, I see the preference for pixels instead of the mystery unfolding before their eyes. The relational nature of solitude moments is key to a new environmental awareness. It happens every time we enter a contemplative state of mind, letting ideas flow, retrieving memories, and even opening our hearts and minds to the inner voice some acknowledge as God. Listening to the inner voice in solitude can be an act of contemplation. However, it also implies practicing knowfulness through habits. Habits are the change that begets culture. We all recognize the importance of changing our lifestyle to a more sustainable one. The challenge is in making those changes last. Only habits can do it because habits induce small changes that can make a big difference. Think about the 1% daily change. It's almost nothing, but at the end of the year, the impact is 37 times higher. However, we can think that habits become routines and eventually cease to impact the practice of knowfulness. Therefore, I would like to briefly explore only two of several universal and transformational habits that lead to a new environmental awareness. And the first one is walking. Now, the neuroscientist John Medina, in a book, says the human brain evolved under conditions of almost constant motion. Walking is intrinsically human and a habit on the experience of freedom, even in a simple stroll. However, on long walks, we favor the practice of solitude, helping us think and have a healthier life. In walking, we receive more from nature than we think. Henry David Thoreau says walking magnifies the receptiveness. And he says, I'm always receiving pure presence by the ton. It is what the ancient experience of pilgrimage is all about. In his philosophy of walking, the French Frédéric Gros says, walking in itself, as it takes time, establishes presence. And presence begets awareness of the sense of place. And the second habit is noticing. Noticing means stop trying to be productive and make the effort of being more curious. Now, Todd Kashdan, a professor and author, defines curiosity as the recognition and desire to seek out new knowledge and information, and the subsequent joy of learning and growing. But the act of noticing can also lead to profound spiritual experiences with the natural world. Now, Chiara Lubich, founder of the Focolare movement and source of inspiration to EcoOne's thinking, shared an experience, Luca reminded us at the beginning of this conference, after a stroll in nature. And she says, I felt that I could perceive, perhaps because of a special grace from God, the presence of God beneath things. Therefore, if the pine trees were gilded by the sun, if the brooks flowed into the glimmering falls, if the flowers in the sky were all decked out in summer array, stronger than all this was the vision of a sun beneath all creation. In a certain sense, I saw, I believe, God who supports, who upholds things. She noticed. How many of us complain about the lack of time to notice new things? Time? Time is a pressing issue when it comes to acting with environmental awareness. And the new environmental awareness implies a better understanding of the meaning of time. What is time? Well, St. Augustine famously replied, and most of you remember, if no one asks me, I know. If if I want to explain it to someone who does ask me, I do not know. And the physicist Alan Lightman experienced once how different cultures have different perceptions of time. In Tramangsram, a small village in Cambodia, people live in single-room huts without electricity and running water. Now, Alan Lightman noticed how each morning women took their bicycles and went to the market located about 16 kilometers from the village. Through a translator, he asked one of these women how long lasted the daily trip. She looked puzzled at Alan Lightman and said, I never thought about that, which I think is kind of curious. Technocultures like ours live in the chronological time, but it is an approach that fragments the way we live, and most of us aren't even aware of it. The time lived in Tramangsram by these women was the right time. And ancient Greek mythology helps to understand the different perceptions with brothers Chronos and Kairos. Chronos is the Greek word for sequential time, with one event after the other. It is quantitative, relentless, and ruthless. It has one direction and it's forward. Now, Kairos is the Greek word for the right time, the time created by events, everlasting time to remember of and being or becoming. A new environmental awareness implies a greater communion between the chronological and chirological perceptions of time, which brings us back to the word communion as a transformative experience. Now, in 2008, I began developing a new vision for the relationship between a person and nature, centered on communion. I call it communocentrism. Now, communocentrism is about being curious to know and understand the deep life relationships that connects us to the world. Communocentrism removes the polarity of one's ethical action from the person, anthropocentrism, or life, biocentrism, planet, ecocentrism, cosmos, cosmocentrism, and even God, theocentrism, and place it in the relationships between all, in their communion. But is communocentrism just a beautiful thought? Is there a future for centering our actions on establishing ever greater bonds of communion? Now, in 2020, a tiny organism that Antonella already spoke about made a tremendous cultural change. It produced such a relational impact in our lives that it will take time to heal. It touched our physiology, but especially our spirituality. A communocentric action can heal the relational wounds of physical and spiritual distance. But what could be the first step to deal with this surprising act of nature? Unlearning. This step may come as a shock to you. Still, in the unsettling words of Anthony de Mello from his book Awareness, that's what learning is all about where spirituality is concerned. Unlearning almost everything you've been taught, a willingness to unlearn, to listen. Unlearning keeps our minds open because we live in a new world. Unlearning keeps our hearts open to the novelty others and nature mean to us. Unlearning keeps our hands open to build the unity we wish to experience in the world. So finally, answering the question I made at the beginning, the first thing I think we need to do to move us toward a new environmental awareness is wake up. And thank you for your attention.
Grazie mille al professor Pagnao che veramente ha realizzato.
Would like Professor Pagnao for this logical pathway between cultural, ecological evolution through changing the words and new words. I have to say that the encyclical letter was a protagonist because it introduced new words that have truly changed the vision of things. And with reference to Kronos and Kairos, I'd like to say that instead of questioning ourselves on what the encyclical letter has truly produced, we should question ourselves what it has generated in terms of conscience, awareness of being all the members of the same family. This is the Kairos of Laudato Si. It was able to unite the science, faith.
Ci ha spiegato davvero in modo divertentissimo.
Thank you for explaining in such a tasteful way. I would ask our helmswoman to guide us in this second round of questions for all speakers. Thank you, Pierluigi, for your moderation this afternoon in this very, very solid contributions which we've had, which help us to relate to the aspects we are examining. We have different questions. And for all speakers, the main question is, in which way did the pandemic, is the pandemic linkable to climate change? Is it not more linked to globalization? Pope Francis, in his last encyclical letter, clearly states that only together can we save ourselves. This calls us to a responsibility in order to help one another reciprocally to understand all this. Do you have any suggestion, any special suggestion to offer us in order to act effectively in this way? Some researchers prove that the advice for sustainable life makes people less committed to the struggle against climate change. Many people think that they cannot have an impact on the problem, and individual behavior is not enough. Professor Passini says that we need to act quickly, but it is necessary to involve institutions. How can we involve them if the scenarios that Mastroianni mentioned are not sufficient to find an agreement amongst the peoples who occupy the Mediterranean basin? It seems that people do not perceive danger well enough and are not present, are not participating, are not sensitive to this kind of meeting and this kind of conversation. Scientists are not listened to. This is nothing new. We need to take our pitchforks and go and occupy the streets. For the Professor De Toni, what do you think of quantum mechanics, relational quantum mechanics and quantum gravitational theories? for the property of matter and time emerging from elementary particles, as Carlo Rovelli illustrates in his books aimed at the mainstream. Thank you. Thank you for all these questions. I hope this is able to guide one last cycle of conclusions, which the speakers can freely respond to in their own time by using these ideas. I would start from by Alberto De Toni, and then we will follow the same order. Thank you. So to the question that was directly for me, the answer is yes. I completely agree with Rovelli in that the latest theories confirm the processes of emergence. So Anderson was right in 1972, and clearly physicists such as Rovelli agree. Are right. I would like to respond to some of the many questions, and some are linked. And what I wanted to say is that the experience of COVID-19 proves to us how we live in a complex world. One of the dimensions of complexity is interdependence. And I would like to say that this pandemic is one of the most evident examples. The human species began the famous out of Africa move. We left Africa 200,000 years ago, and we reached every corner of the planet. There was a sort of a diaspora starting from Africa till Patagonia and the ends of the earth. Then a big crunch began, which we can date back to the discovery of America, when the two parts of the world meet. And this big crunch, this reunion, as it were, of the human species. If you do want to pin down a date, in 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down and when the two worlds begin to speak to one another, and especially a great logistical network is created. Imagine low cost. For example, 1989 is the year in which we have the World Wide Web as well. So we create two networks. One is an information network, one is a logistics network, which make the world interconnected. Therefore, clearly, people circulate, information circulates, and the virus circulates too. So in 2 days, it traveled all across the world from China, and through the IT network, fear also circulated. So what do I mean? That our dimension is one of total interconnection, nearly 8 billion people, and many, many of these are interconnected. This interconnection increases social problems, and the virus is one example, but substantially the answer to this hyperconnection is closure. So in practice, Brexit and the fight against migrants and all new sovereignty examples are times and instances of disconnection. When we have a problem which we can't answer, the first thing we do is let's disconnect. Lockdown, too, if you think about it, is a disconnection. What's the true theme? That disconnection can be a temporary response to a problem which we cannot resolve, but we know the second principle of thermodynamics, that if we closed systems implode and open systems evolve. So the response of disconnecting is long-term a losing one. We have studied this, but there's nothing to do. We need to stay open. And at this point, the question becomes, if we have no vaccine, if we have no answer about climate, I'm not sure whether you know, but a few days ago, an interview came up. It was a scholar saying, ladies and gentlemen, if we even did what we can do, we won't emerge from this. This is a tragic message, and I agree with one of the questions where it seems that individual action is useless. But what we are underestimating is circularity and the effect of the action. I would like to laud action. How often have we found ourselves without a solution? Very often. Yet we continue to act because action is what has brought us so far and will bring us elsewhere. So we need to act regardless, because action does change the context of problems and where we stand. So in a different context, perhaps the same problem has a different solution and has a solution. And what I want to say, therefore, is that we need to continue to act without isolating ourselves and one another, and knowing that we have the effect of circularity. It is possible that interdependent action of millions of people suddenly set off a virtuous feedback which we have not yet understood, and therefore, in my view, we need to have hope. Thank you, Professor. Very convincing. This perspective of action which is concrete, gives a concrete dimension to Laudato Si. Pietro Ramellini. For a conclusion, are you with us? On the first question about pandemic and climate, I approve what Professor De Toni said. A pandemic depends on many interdependent factors, and climate is one of them. These are factors which interact amongst one another, and a change of climate can have an effect on ecosystems, and this might create a contact between local populations and species of bats or all the various animals which were quoted, and there is the addition of the risk of spillover. As far as single actions are concerned, there are parents who will learn to teach their children, there are teachers, there are doctors, and everyone at their level can contribute and can introduce initiatives and act in volunteering, and these are all the drops that we need to form an ocean. As far as the institutions are concerned, well, this is something which happens gradually. It's not an all or nothing situation, but I believe that there are thresholds as well. Perhaps it seems that nobody's moving, but we come close to a threshold following which everything clicks into action, perhaps. Now, there are many institutions, just to mention a few, schools, for example, can capitalize on an important document by UNESCO 2014, where they highlight that at a world level, one of the priorities of educational systems is that of educating to sustainability. There are many references and initiatives which are coming about. Or there are political institutions. Well, we should say that the political institutions are intervening, and quite a lot. The problem is in which direction. If they intervene in a direction which promotes this integral ecology, or blocks it or denies it in many ways. So there are administrations all over the world which continue to insist on coal and oil, probably because of their interest and co-interests. In my view, there is a question which I cannot answer, and I think nobody might be able to, and that is, will it be fast enough? Will our reaction be fast enough in order to contrast the dynamics of the biosphere which we have set off. This is what worries me most, meaning that we can enact a series of initiatives, but we need to see if they are incisive and swift enough in order to be able to invert certain issues, problems such as global warming. Thank you. The time is the most critical variable we have before us. I agree completely with the professor. Professor Mastroianni. Good evening. I will start from the last question. Will it be fast enough? We can certainly do so if we involve individuals. And individuals have the transformative power. I work with the institutions, and I can tell you that in 2015, famous Paris COP, which should have identified the solution, an agreement was found. It was maybe susceptible to criticism, but even if we had found the best agreement in the world as institutions, states, nations, United Nations, an agreement is a piece of paper, and the ecosystem does not react to a piece of paper. What do we need all these provisions for, which seem to be a saving grace? Taxes, compensation systems, agreements. These are nothing but containers to get people to change their behavior. It is the changed behavior of individuals which makes the difference, but it is hindered by two factors which are very well studied. Simplifying, a certain inertia depends, first of all, by the feeling of being a drop in the ocean, and to something more perverse, but very natural. The idea that change entails sacrifice, and therefore, why should I be the first to go? And both ideas are deeply wrong. The first is, why am I just a drop in the ocean? We live in a system which is qualified by a multiplier. That means that it transforms drops into tsunami. Aside from the example, if I decide to eat less meat, I have a carbon impact which is slightly lower, but that's not the whole story. If I decide to eat less meat, the impacts of this choice of mine have a cascade effect on an infinite series of other factors. For example, I give a small contribution to unhinging a system which is should be human with regard to certain forms of rearing practices. And this farm management system is part of that system which makes us vulnerable to COVID and seems to be a means of contagion as well. Eating less meat of a certain kind, I create food sovereignty in countries that do not have access to their land, because if we keep eating bad quality meat, we are part of a system that needs to rear massively, and that means taking away earth from the land from the poor. So I take away my weight to a system which burns the Amazon forest, because this system needs to cultivate an infinite quality of soy, which is transformed into feed, and so on, and so on, and so on. But if I eat less meat, and this is my second point, why should I be the one to do this? If I eat less meat, I do nothing but making my life better, because it is known that a diet which is the most healthy one, with a composition of the various best combination of food, coincides with the diet which has the least impact on the environment. In practice, the sum of small sustainability choices on the part of everybody can resolve the problem in time, even if time is short. If we don't do it, we are completely idiotic because we choose not to defuse a scenario which is truly problematic for simply because we don't want to live better, which is completely ridiculous. Is diet connected to COVID? Second question. Yes, climate too. The COVID issue was a fantastic demonstration of something that is still doubted today, that Laudato Si works. Laudato Si does work because it has its technocratic version. It's called Agenda 2030. It is a revolution in policy making because it tells us that we made a mistake in the past. We thought that certain values were in contradiction. We chose one value which is called wealth or growth or development, and we always thought that this was in contradiction with peace, environment, and the human rights, that every one of these values might take place despite the other one. Instead, with Agenda 2020 and integral ecology, we introduce the idea that each value supports one another. So this year there is an encouraging perspective. The European Union gives itself a plan which is called Green Deal, which means to inject a lot of money into the economy to make it green. Then a little beast comes along called COVID, creates a load of problems, and according to the old mindset, according to which the various priorities are in contrast with one another, the first reaction was, hang on a minute, at this point we don't have the means for a Green Deal. It's no longer time to deal with little trees and butterflies. We need to deal with our health. But Laudato Si works. The European Union, the Commission, took a week to conclude that we can't think this way. If we wish to resolve the COVID problem, we need to create a green economy. If we want to resolve the economic slowdown caused by COVID, we need to create a green economy. COVID is not an isolated case. It's just the tip of the iceberg of a series of phenomena which show us one thing, that the kind of economic value that we have chosen is deeply in contrast with the value called health. The value called health can only be reached if we found economies which are in a correct relationship, in a just relationship with land and society. So one thing is very important, that everybody plays their part. In this way, we will have time and you will have the satisfaction to send me home and make me lose my job, because if everybody does their part, we won't need the United Nations anymore. Thank you. This is a very apt conclusion, which is has a holistic vision for the responsibility of the individual person. Antonio Pasini. The questions which are more for me, there has been perhaps a misunderstanding. I did not say that climate change caused COVID. It's that both COVID and climate change may have a common matrix. So if you cut down forests and eat in a certain way, etc., the spillover is encouraged. So clearly we are living in a global system. The globalization of transport, for example, has helped a lot. But there is also a climate globalization. So things are connected even if there is not a direct cause and effect in climate change. This happens with other vectors as well, which change the area in which they operate. So this is just what I wanted to say. This applies to malaria, yellow fever, and so on. The other thing is action. I spoke about action a lot. This needs to be individual, collective and political. All these things together. I always say this when I speak to people and young people. The first step is awareness. And then Laudato Si as well is divided up into chapters which follow a specific itinerary, that of understanding first, and seeing, understanding, acting, and so on. And this is more or less the same thing. The first thing is to be aware that there is a problem, and why have I connected to the two things? They have the climate and COVID because they have the same DNA. We cannot perceive such non-linear growth, but science know how to do this, and they do it well. First of all, awareness, because it brings you to change your lifestyle, but this is not enough. We need virtuous cycles starting from the grassroots level, consumption and energy saving, changing diet, and the distributed production of energy is difficult in the city, but in the countryside, a house can be completely independent with using different forms of energy, and the geothermal, wind energy or solar energy. The last thing, which was not least important, is that of putting pressure on politics, because it's about creating a big energy transition which needs to be managed by policymakers, not by me as an individual. I can give you advice, but so that these actions are scientifically founded, so that mistakes don't happen, because the actions which are brought about are realistic and have a scientific foundation. Therefore, this is something which perhaps, I'm not sure whether we should get our pitchforks, but certainly the movement of many people and the movement of many movements, all these people who have done, I always say, have done more in 2 years, these young people, than all the reports of the NPCC. So we're all in the same boat. Let's try to move together individually and as groups, and then we will transform things.
A questo punto l'ultima conclusione, che potrebbe anche essere accompagnata da...
Thank you, Professor Pessini. So, Professor Pagnao.
Well, others already replied to these questions in a very, clear way. So what could I add? Well, honestly, when I was listening to the questions and also while I was listening to the answers, and especially about climate change, I honestly was not looking so much to the outer climate change, but to the storm we live inside of us. I mean, what I feel is that we live in a world where we actually can communicate much better. So we live in a world of too much information. And I don't know if you remember, but in the last century, there was a guy called Aldous Huxley, which wrote a book named Brave New World. And it's very interesting because this book, he says that when we live in a world of too much information, whatever has meaning becomes irrelevant. And I think this is the cause of the storm of the climate change we live inside each one of us. And for example, to understand climate change in weather terms and so on, scientists use facts, right? And there is this book, I don't know, it's from an article, I don't know if you know this book from Scientific American, where it says the science of thoughts, and then there is a question, why do facts fail? Why the facts fail is because why do facts fail to change people's minds? I mean, we present them the facts, but people don't change their mind. Why? Because facts will never do what relationships can. So the problem is we need to establish first a relationship between me and the other person. And once we have a relationship, then I can present the facts and she will understand them. Otherwise, if I don't have a relationship, I can present the facts, I can present the entire truth, and the other person won't understand it because we don't have a relationship. So we live inside ourselves this storm of too much information, this climate, this inner climate change. So that's what I think, that's why I think that the practice of this idea of, crazy idea of knowfulness from the noosphere that comes from the Father Pierre Théard Chardin, Jesuit priest, and could be a way to, let's say, each one of us deals with the storm inside. And then the challenge that COVID presents us is the challenge of relationships, because actually relationships demand presence. I mean, demand more face-to-face than a Facebook, okay? So, and this is a great challenge. But honestly, I think we have an ability that we are neglecting, honestly. We are curious beings. I mean, we should thrive on curiosity, because curiosity will lead to creativity. And creativity will lead to new ways of establishing these relationships with the conditions that we have. Take, for example, the use of masks. Have you ever met someone for the first time and she's wearing a mask? Do you have any idea of the face of this person just to the eyes? It's impossible. I mean, I'm teaching students of the first year, and honestly, I see their faces with the mask and I cannot imagine the face. Actually, we have to take a little bit the mask just to know them and see the face, and they in relation to me. But that means that we have to use more our eyes to establish a relationships. And actually, it's very interesting because through the eyes, we can see a lot, okay? So, well, I just wanted to add this little comment that do not forget the inner climate change of too much information and the need to spend some time with our thoughts, to spend some more time and creative time with others, because that's the only way, I think, that then we can present the facts, and these facts actually change a little bit the lifestyle of each one of us.
Grazie professore, devo dire è suggestiva questa inversione.
Thank you very much, Professor. Well, this inversion, the strength of word on facts, and it's very striking, and it goes along the lines of the gospel, that is the word par excellence, which has inspired Laudato Si and our action as well. So I should like to close this session by thanking all the speakers. I appreciated the quality of all the speeches. I was really overwhelmed by the richness of this dialogue. I should like to thank Fiorani and Valentina Falcioni. She will be giving us a little bit of housekeeping. So thank you, Alberto De Toni, Aldorello Pasini, Miguel Rosa Oliveira, Samuel Ramellini. I should like to say that Laudato Si, it's not a chapter that opens and then ends. It's an open chapter towards the solution of these issues. There are three major actions that the Church is putting in practice, and we have to accompany the economy of Francis, the change of the new generations, to whom we're going to ask to look one another in the eyes and create new words. The Global Educational Pact, it's a great action that COVID, unfortunately, is a little bit slowed down, but which can change the world. And the commitment of the Department of Laudato Si within the Dicastery for promoting integral human development. For 7 years, it will have an impact and effect on the Universal Church. So thank you once again, all of you, and I hand over to Valentina. So thank you very much, Luigi. moderating this session was not easy. We started with a special guest, Luca Mercalli, and I should like to thank him once again for introducing us to this very fruitful afternoon. I should like to thank all the participants online, and on behalf of EcoOne Commission, I should like to apologize for the technical issues we've had for the online streaming, we are recording all the video. They will be published in the next few days with translations in the different languages. So we can now have a break, and we remain connected online, and will be resuming at 6 o'clock sharp for the lab coordinated by Professor Stefania Papa. So I'll see you at 6 o'clock sharp. Thank you.
eventualmente dopo.
Molto umilmente, però non posso non gioire leggendo questa frase che tu hai messo per il webinar, perché quando abbiamo fatto il convegno del 2014 io ho fatto quella cosa sulla relazionalità nella natura, cioè uno dei concetti con cui concludo poi l'articolo
È proprio questo.
è proprio questo ci impedisce di considerare
Buon pomeriggio a tutti, un benvenuto ai nostri relatori di questo pomeriggio che sono il professor Giorgio Vacchiano, Emilio Sciuvieco, Juan Carlos Bolcic e il dottor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our new speakers and all those who are following us from many parts of Italy and the world. Thank you very much to each and every one of you. Stefania Papa. I am a professor of ecology at the Luigi Vanvitelli Campagna University, a member of EcoOne, a member of the Focolari movement. This panel's title is Ecology and Society, Good Practices. Pope Francis, in the encyclical letter Laudato Si', places the concept of integral ecology at the heart of his thought, stating that when we talk about environment, we refer also to a specific relationship, that between nature and society inhabiting it. This does not authorize us to consider nature as something separate from us or simply a frame of our life. We are included in it, we are part of it, and we are compenetrated by it. We have experienced this. The majority of ecological problems has roots in social issues, and what we are being asked to do today is to bring harmony between humanity and nature. Good practices through our ecological commitment represent a more than valid tool in order to have an impact on the collectivity so that this objective may be reached. Professor Giorgio Vacchiano, in his webpage, introduces himself as, from the first summers I used to spend on the Alps as a child, I called home my prairies, my woods, my forests, and my paths as I walked. We are connected with the natural world, even though we don't often realize this. And what is good for the planet is good, if you look carefully, to us as well. Professor Vacchiano is teacher in management and planning of forestry at the Statale University in Milan, Italy, and his research aims at understanding how trees and forests respond to climate changes. 2 years ago, in his research, he was indicated by the Nature magazine as one of the 11 prominent scientists in the world. But we will hear how, through his own studies, he encourages us to respond to the challenge launched by Pope Francis in his encyclical letter. Thank you, Professor Vacchiano. Microphone, please. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Here I am. I share my presentation. Thank you for introducing me. This relationship between humans and nature, which I have lived out in my own skin, and I do so daily in forests. I would like to tell you this story through the prism of forestry management. This is what I deal with in my research, and I would like to share some challenges and some solutions for a balanced relationship with forests, so that through this the common good and well-being and happiness may be guaranteed. This is for persons living today and tomorrow. We know well that our society is at a crisis point. We need to deal with various crises at the same time. One of them is climate, and this is generated by the continuous increase of our emissions of greenhouse gases. This has two main consequences. First is the increase in temperature, so a warming of emerged land and oceans, which has nearly reached 2 degrees every 100 years, and an increase in extreme events in the frequency and the intensity of damaging events, which not only endanger ecosystems, but which endanger us. So it's about inverting these tendencies. The only way to do it is to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases. And not only this, in order to satisfy the objectives of the Paris Accord and to contain warming below 2 degrees or within 2 degrees in this century, we need to zero our greenhouse gas emissions around 2050 and continue to reduce these by entering into a negative emission, net negative global emissions. This means absorbing more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere with compared to the one we are emitting. How do we do this? What is the technology which can allow us to reach this negative emission? The most well-known technology is trees and forests. Thanks to photosynthesis, trees absorb CO2 from the atmosphere and transform it into themselves, into wood. It is organic compounds of carbon which enter the soil, and they remain sequestered and they remain locked in there, and they no longer enter into this atmospheric cycle which is creating the damage we're talking about. Their natural systems are helping us a lot. Out of all the CO2 that humanity has emitted starting from before the Industrial Revolution 1750 to today, only half of this is in the atmosphere. The other half was reabsorbed by oceans in equal parts by oceans and terrestrial ecosystems, including forests. So even today, they absorb between 1/3 and 1/4 of all our human emissions of CO2. 25% is not everything. It's not 100%. It's an interesting number, it's an important number, but it means two things. It means that forests today are not enough. They are important, but not sufficient. On the one hand, we need to reduce our emissions. Trees can't do everything. They won't be able to do this alone. We need to help the trees to help us. On the other hand, there are strategies to try to increase this quota of CO2, which is sequestered by trees and forests, either by increasing their ability to absorb or by stopping them from losing forests, because on a world scale, the dominating tendency is that of deforestation. This is the loss of forest surface due to the replacement of with other uses, mainly fields for intensive agriculture, soy, palm oil, or for cattle rearing. We're talking about the tropical portions of the Earth, as trees are made of CO2 transformed into wood. When we eliminate them, often burning them, this CO2 returns up into the atmosphere, and deforestation is now responsible for nearly 3 billion tons of CO2, which is issued into the atmosphere every year, and half of this due to products which are not consumed where this deforestation takes place, but they are exported. So there is a delocalization of the impact here in Europe. We purchase goods and services and assets which in other continents are responsible for this deforestation. In the last 2 years, furthermore, we have all heard the news all over the world talking about a similar problem, for talking about forest fires, bushfires. Fire is a natural ecological phenomenon. It's part of the life of ecosystems, but at this moment it is climate change is making it more intense and more frequent than it would happen normally. Therefore, California, we see every year, we see forest fires, Australia, even Siberia. Even in this case, we are risking to generate a vicious cycle, because if they burn due to any kind of reason, the greenhouse gases, which are normally sequestered inside the trees, return into the air. And we're looking at 7 billion tons.
Questo genere di disturbi, come li
This type of fires, which is a disturbance for vegetation, so fire, but also windstorms and attacks to insects are on the increase. This is data for only Europe, where it is calculated that 1 million cubic meters more wood every year is destroyed by these agents due to the pressure brought about by climate change, which put these extreme weather events on the increase. If we then want to increase the absorption of carbon by forests, so we need to take into account some natural laws that we are in the process of understanding, and we understand now more than in the past. For example, forests have a natural cycle. So they are born, they grow, and they die. A very debated over issue by my colleagues is what is the ideal forest that can absorb carbon quickly. Well, this being not so old a forest, because old forests may have benefits in terms of biodiversity, but if we want to maximize carbon absorption, we have to say in a range between 50 and 250 years. Then photosynthesis is limited. If trees do not have water, drinking water, they cannot live well like human beings. So at world level, there are phenomena of mortality of trees due to drought, and this is yet another effect of climate change. And when trees are stressed due to lack of water, they cannot absorb CO2. And this is the reason why in some of the biggest forests of the earth, the Amazon or the basin of the Congo, due to higher drought, it is feared that in 10-15 years, these big forests will no longer be able to absorb carbon from the atmosphere, because there will be more dying trees due to drought and wildfires than younger trees. So a great lung that so far has helped us in reducing a little bit altering climate gases, so we'll stop doing this job for us. And the recent work focused on the Amazon has recently allowed us to discover that, of course, forests can be reduced. It's not due to trees that are reduced, but when there's a lack of water or severe drought, the tallest trees having greater tissues to be maintained suffer more, because they require much more water. If these trees die due to lack of water, forest becomes less tall. It ends up by losing its tallest individuals, which are a repair to birds, to biodiversity. So in a few years, forests can change their appearance. One of the remedies that is often proposed is to plant trees. So let's continue to plant trees, thus increasing the forest surface. Well, this is no doubt one of the possible solutions. It's not the only one. First of all, we need to opt for the right trees in the right place for them to be healthy and to grow old. And it is also true that planting trees does not have a positive effect on the climate everywhere, because in the Arctic, for example, replacing snow with forests can have a shining effect, because forests can warm up the atmosphere. It is as if we were in a dark car in summertime. If we were able to put together all the trees we may plant on Earth and many other solutions based on nature, so fight against deforestation, better management of forests, improving agriculture, conservation, and so on and so forth, all research studies show that we would not be able to bring about more than 30% of the mitigation, and with a lower contribution as far as our emissions increase. So the message being that we have to decarbonize energy, transport, so we have to reduce our carbon emissions and then leave the trees and forests to do their part of the job. Of course, if they are healthy, if they're in good shape. But of course, forests give us a lot of gifts, not only carbon absorption, they produce timber, they protect the soil. So we are faced with a challenge, how to keep all these effects at the same time. Well, a new forest management is appearing. It's called climate smart forestry. This is forest management that acknowledges the effects on the climate of all the things that are done with the forest. So you can go on. Go ahead. You've just a few minutes left, Giorgio. Okay. A climate-smart forestry means keeping into account the effects, the climate effects of forest management, and even more than that, the climate effects do not stop with trees. For example, we may use the timber in order to trap carbon. So I have here a shelf behind me. It contains carbon that was trapped by the atmosphere a decade ago. So wood has a climatic effect, so we can replace fossil fuels with wood, or building materials with wood, thus avoiding using less eco-friendly materials like plastics. So you can replace 1 cubic meter of concrete with wood, and you can save 1 ton of CO2. The recommendation is to use it in cascade, with a cascading effect. So if we have to take wood, we have to trap carbon as long as possible with long-use materials, and then with the residue, so we may generate energy instead of using fossil fuels. Could you please draw your conclusions? So just 1 minute. I just need 1 minute to draw my conclusions. What can we do with the forests at the risk? We have to help them stand the pressures for drought. There's forest management to conserve the forest and to put it in balance with the water. Trees that cannot survive should be eliminated, and the others should be kept. Using the water we have, there's management to prevent wildfires, interrupting the possibility of fire to propagate from one forest to another. It is also possible to keep the connectivity of forests, thus avoiding fragmenting them in small parts that cannot communicate with one another without the passage of species, of pollens, of of seeds. How can all this be done? Of course, through forest planning. And we need to understand what is the vocation of each forest. We have a forest for biodiversity, another to absorb carbon, another to produce renewable materials. So we need to plan ahead of time and understand what it takes to manage the forest responsibly and to understand the impact of that forest on ourselves and our capability of resisting to climate pressures. So this is the proposal that we are putting forward in Italy and in many other countries. And this is what I wanted to share with you this afternoon. So thank you very much, Giorgio. I was really struck when at the beginning you said we have to help forests to help us. Well, yes, because you helped us understand even more that maintaining and managing a forest is not just out of respect for the environment. It's a key action for us to be able to survive on this planet. Now, the academia is a privileged place also for the integral education, not only of students, but of ourselves. Emilio Ciuviego is professor of geography and director of environmental ethics at Alcalá University in Spain, where he's a coordinator of PhD in the technology of geographic information. He's leader of the research group on teledetection. He was visiting professor at the universities of Berkeley, Cambridge, Santa Barbara, Maryland, and Canadian Center of Excellency for Science, Sensors and Teledetection. Professor Ciuviego, we know that your rich academic experience, but your daily reality has been very much impacted by the encyclical letter by Pope Francis. Can you tell us how?
Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to talk in English. Have prepared some slides on the activities that we are currently doing. Can you hear me well?
Sì, sì.
Okay. So basically, I'm going to mention some of the activities that we are developing within two areas of activity. One is the Environmental Ethics Chair that was funded 7 years ago by a private foundation in Spain, and is co-sponsored by the University of Alcalá, where I work, nearby Madrid. And also I am a member of the Commission of Integral Ecology that was created by the Cardinal of Madrid as a result actually of the Laudato Si encyclical letter. So this environmental ethics chair is intended to develop research on better understanding the way people approach environmental conservation, the motivations, and the activities to promote a higher commitment towards environment. We have a strong activity in the social aspects of environment, even though we come from a scientific background. Myself, I'm teaching at the Department of Environmental Sciences of the university. And we have been quite encouraged by the publication of the encyclical letter of the Pope. Actually, it has been a great, outstanding issue for us. So basically, we try to develop research on motivations of people, on practical impacts of environmental commitments, and how the different philosophical and religious backgrounds approach the environment and how they are linked to the environment. I'm particularly interested in how the Catholic theology and the Catholic tradition approach the environment, and how this background can help to better understand our relation to the environment. So we produce research reports, technical meetings and conferences. We do also some transfer activities, trying to improve the public awareness about environmental issues and problems. We organize courses, and also we have online resources in our webpage. So all this information on these documents are available for public download. So they are in Spanish though, but I guess many of you can follow them. The first one was about the roots of the environmental organizations in Spain, what are their philosophical and religious background. Then we moved to analyzing the contents in educational textbooks of the ordinary education. We also published research on the calculation of carbon footprint of our daily food, taking three study cases and analyzing the whole life cycle of these products. And then recently we published research on how our approach to the contemplation of nature would help to make our environmental commitment stronger. But probably the most important impact of these reports have been one that we published actually as a result of the encyclical letter of the Pope, in which we try to encourage Catholic parishes to better understand the encyclical contents and also to improve their environmental practices in the daily activities in their career. So the title is Following Laudato Si and Suggestions for the Ecological Conversion of the Catholic Parishes. This has been widely distributed. We sent different copies to all bishops in Spain. And as a result of that, we have received a lot of compliments and a lot of suggestions from different parishes throughout the country that are interested to incorporate these ideas, not just on the environmental management of the parish, but also in their activities, in trying to incorporate also a little bit of the spiritual, ecological spirituality, let's say, that also the Pope suggests. I have been personally involved in more than 50 events related to the Laudato Si encyclica, including Catholic parishes, universities, civic centers, etc. We also even participated in the COP meeting in Madrid. As you remember, the event was planned originally in Chile, but then it was finally done in Madrid in early December last year. And I have, in most of the cases, I have noticed very wide, very open mind to the ideas expressed in the encyclical. So I think it has a great impact. Probably it has a higher impact outside of the Catholic Church than inside. So sometimes the Catholic people are a bit slower, in understanding and following the encyclica. One of the first activities we did as a result of the publication of the Laudato Si was to organize an inter-religious meeting in a Catholic shrine in the northern part of Spain. This was also funded by the private foundation that is funding our environmental ethics chair. So there were people from the largest religious traditions, including Jewish, Muslim, Hindus, Buddhists, etc. And we finally came out with a declaration that is open to the public. So I share with you in case any of you want to join that, in which we recognize the values of religions and the importance of the dialogue between religious leaders and environmental scientists. There were also 6 environmental scientists involved in this meeting, and all of them recognized the importance of both having a better knowledge about environmental problems by religious leaders, but also the importance of environmental scientists to recognize the role of religions in providing a wider awareness about environmental problems. One of the activities I participate, and I want to highlight this one, was a meeting of priests of several Catholic dioceses in the northeast of Spain, in Catalonia, in which, as you say, the ecological conversion was labeled as an exigence of the faith. This is quite a strong statement, but it is important to emphasize that the encyclical letter has an important impact for many Catholic theologians it still needs to be better understood and better, let's say, spreading. But there are always very, very positive and hopeful signs that the letter has been quite relevant. Another activity that we have recently finalized is an observatory of the CO2 footprint. You know, everything that we do, transport, food, clothing, etc., has some sort of emissions derived from the different phases of the life cycle of that. So we intended to improve, let's say, the awareness of ordinary citizens about the impact of what they do, and trying to help them to have a more sustainable consumption and activities. So this web page is also in Spanish, sorry about that, but that includes some background, scientific background about climate change, about how carbon footprint is computed. And the two main aspects are in the alternatives. So we include a list of emissions, average emissions coming from different consumption sectors, like food, transport, clothing, computers, even pets. So the people can estimate what would be the impact of making one of other decisions in their daily habits. And also they can, there is a carbon footprint calculator inside the web page. So everyone can include their data and compare, and this is very important, compare, because most of the people don't know what are the reference, let's say, to compare with. In this case, we provide the carbon footprint of the person that has filled their data, but also comparing with their age group, with their profession, with the resident area, with the level of study, sex, and the national average. So I think our idea is that this tool is quite educational, to help people, first starting from our own students, but for everyone, trying to make more informative choices about their daily habits. So they can, this report gives an idea of whether your habits are more or less in the average of others, are better than others in your own group of people, or are significantly lower. The second branch of my activity, let's say, is the collaboration with an integral ecology commission that was created by the Cardinal of Madrid 3.5 years ago. We have been working in different activities, helping the application of the encyclical letter to the dioceses. We run an inventory of environmental practices in parishes. We are now currently running a project for building solar panels on the roofs of parishes. We have also participated in the formation of priests and seminarians, and also we help in the celebration of the ecumenical day of prayer for creation, in which our Christian brothers also participate. This is the inventory of good environmental practices that we run. We try to make as well known as possible this initiative, but basically to understand what was the initial point, let's say, what was the status of the environmental practices at the parishes of Madrid. We only got 13% of the whole parishes. We have about 430 parishes in the dioceses. We got about 65, not a very high number, but the good thing is that it's fairly well distributed in the area of the city. We are currently pushing an innovative project that involves two energy companies to install solar panels in parishes. This installation will be done by the investment of the companies, and the parish only would provide the roof, and they will create some saving in the energy invoice of the parish. But more important than that, it will provide also an educational to all people attending that parish, so that the church is really committed to this aspect. So my conclusion, let's say, on my thoughts, very personal thoughts on the impacts of the Laudato Si, at least in the areas that I know better, some Spanish regions and mostly Madrid, is that there has been a very positive impact on the interests of Catholic institutions and persons, of course, on environmental issues that were not at all very well regarded in the past. As you know, probably many of you know, at least in Spain it happens, the environmental commitment and environmental orientation is in many cases associated to ideological movements and political parties that are not very close, let's say, to the church. And this creates prejudices in the Catholic people about environmental issues. And this encyclical letter to me has been a good step into that direction. So to better recognize that environmental care is not anything that we take from somebody else, but is fully part of our Catholic tradition. On the negative side, let's say, I think ecological conversion is still to be well understood and well followed. This is something that will take obviously quite a bit of time, but I think we are in the proper track. And also, I think we need to make a stronger effort to develop the theological foundations for environment commitment and environmental approach, let's say. So I think, particularly the Catholic theology has not developed too much all his potentials, particularly in terms of the theology of creation. I think environmental issues have been mostly attached to social doctrine of the church and the social implication of environment, which is fine, it's quite good. But also I think we have a stronger branch, let's say, of the Catholic theology, which is related to how we conceive creation. And this is something to be developed in my point of view. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie veramente, professor Ciuvieco. Proprio come dice lei,
Thank you very much, Professor Ciuvieco. So, fostering ecological conversion to answer the appeal to common good for humankind and for the future. Of course, there's a need for changing the paradigm, as Pope Francis has suggested within Laudato Si. So thank you very much. And then the energy issue is closely related to protecting the environment.
Di risorse ambientali.
Also because energy sources are fossil fuels whose combustion is highly polluting. And as we know, this is responsible for greenhouse effect and climate change. Pope Francis says that we need to take brave and important decisions on the use of natural resources, specifically on future sources of energy. Professor Juan Carlos Bolcic is currently president of the Argentinian Hydrogen Association and member of the Hydrogen Energy Foundation since 1982. He has been involved in this field. Why is hydrogen, Professor, the key for a low-emission future? Over to you, Professor. It's a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
This means mostly solar and wind energy and bio energy. They are, of course, distributed and are renewables. Normally converted into electricity, but we must look also to have a storage fuel like hydrogen, and also think in heat. Altogether, maximize the exergy or the usable energy. And we see a synergy with the production of very important elements for life, like fresh food and drinkable water. The renewable energies are the only solution for the global sustainable energetic system. They are variable and sometimes are unpredictable, and we must harmonize between the offer of nature and the demand, which is also variable. Practically, all the natural resources are transformed first in electricity, but the application of only direct electricity is limited by its stability of the electrical grid and their capacities. The storage of electricity is also limited if we think only in rechargeable batteries, condensers, mechanical dispositives, air compression, or in a higher level to the water pumping. However, hydrogen could supply a flexible way to attain electricity, firm electricity, when we don't have sun or also when we don't have enough wind, to have an available and safe fuel and stable for industry, transportation, and any other energy demand sector. Hydrogen allows the storage of energy in the widest range of power and energy. But altogether must be seen and practiced in a dignified life with freedom and with responsible use of energy. And we see an increasing enthusiasm of many people, especially after the publication of Laudato Si 5 years ago. All the creation need to live with dignity in this, our house. But as a reciprocity, also is the obligation for everybody to make a commitment with it. All must participate moral and from the material and practical point of view in the preservation of our common house, because all life is in it and based in the principles of mutual respect and universal solidarity. We recommend for them to start with the more individual term, person to person, and extended it to different levels of the society and also to a global concept. And we want to remember the concept of in each house a fabric, in ogni casa una fabbrica. We see here the concept we are claiming from the International Association for Hydrogen Energy, which we call the hydrogen civilization, because with energy, by means of hydrogen, we need from our raw material, the more important is water, and we need to manage water in different qualities, especially for the water decomposition. We need to control and to manage the salt content. And also we have heat release and electricity available and have the hydrogen fuel, and this will help a lot for in each village, in each house, in each place to have fresh food. I saw in the previous presentation that one of the largest contribution for the CO2 emissions is transportation. If we change into more production of food close to the consumption places, we can reduce it. And of course, employing a fuel like hydrogen, we don't produce any CO2. Our proposal is that, well, of course, the world is requiring clean energy. We need to manage cheap fuels and to eliminate the control of few people over the most and a lot of people that also are becoming poorer because this world and regional and national and etc. organization. This is why we put a lot of emphasis that every person must learn about this culture and have more chance to have a fishing route to live producing something useful for himself, for his family, for the community. And we see that this is completely in agreement with the claiming of our Pope Francesco for the integral ecology and only working for the common goodness, we can have a clean environment and for the future generations. And for this, we need education, education, education. Well, a few words about the properties of hydrogen. It is the more abundant element of nature. It is very low density, 14 times lower than air. It's a wide range of inflammability between 4 and 75%. But fortunately, it don't produce cancer. It can be inhaled. And when it is obtained in room conditions, it is a gas, and we can think like a natural gas or a biogas and manage it in pipes, in cylinders, compressed, among other ways. And when the hydrogen is burned, only the production is water vapor. Hydrogen means generation of water. So it's an extraordinary cycle. We start from the raw material water and we come back to water. So no contamination. Basically, what is an electrolyzer concept? We need electricity coming from the renewable sources like sun or wind electricity or solar electricity with 1.5 to 2 volts per cell. In the anode, we introduce the water, clean water with very little or no salt content. Then the water decomposes and we collect the oxygen at the anode. The hydrogen, the proton, travels through a membrane, proton exchange membrane, and at the cathode, it is collected and we have the hydrogen. Well, both gases are important. Also, oxygen can be used for several other applications. And also biomass is another way, renewable raw material, which can be also make a synergy with the electrolysis system to have cheaper and more affordable hydrogen. How to use, how to employ hydrogen? By combustion, like natural gas, in internal combustion engines, alternatives, rotatory engines, or in combined cycles, in turbines, as we know, in the range from few kilowatts to megawatts, tens or hundreds of megawatts, with efficiencies that for today, the largest system have a little higher than 60% efficiency. But another very important and new way to use hydrogen is through electrochemical conversion with the fuel cells. And a fuel cells, basically, we can think as a reverse electrolyzer. Hydrogen is introduced at the anode, and we take the oxygen from the air, and a voltage, different electrical voltage are established, and if we close the circuit, we have a current. The voltage per cell is about 0.8, 0.9 volts, and with a lot of these units, we can have very high voltages and also high currents, and the efficiency of this small system is close to 50%. And they produce what we can call a complete usable system, and not only electricity, but also heat, which can be used, for example, as home to have firm electricity and heat, but also water, chemically pure water.
Juan Carlos, only 2 minutes.
Oh, well, we have experimental plant as a public school in Pico Truncado, Santa Cruz province. We have all this system installed, and we have the water as a self-sufficient element. We have the desalinization, the compression of the gases, hydrogen and oxygen, the heat release. We used to have warm water and to grow in greenhouses plants. You see here the laboratory. Another concrete and smaller development was the we installed in Base Esperanza in Antarctica, Argentina, a small windmill, electrolyzer, a small furnace to have, for example, pizza and some electric conversion system. The larger application is by the company Hichico in Comodoro Rivadavia in Argentina, Patagonia, with 2 electrolyzers of 120 normal standard cubic meter of hydrogen, and they use wind energy for the electricity. They produce hydrogen, which is used in a motor generator of 1.4 megawatts, and also employ the oxygen. Here is the water, and excuse me, the objective of Hichiko for the long term is to have attend future markets, regional and international, with green hydrogen. And they have more than 10 years with operative experience, improvements, etc. In the application, we see, for example, the cars, the Mirai, which means futuro, future, and one of these cars which can be recharged in only 3 minutes with hydrogen and with fuel cells. Electricity is produced on board, and it is an electric car. And one of these cars were prepared. This month was supplied for our Papa Francesco. And we see this is a very, very extraordinary thing that will help to diffuse and to take aware a lot of people all over the world about the bondage.
Make people aware
Make people aware about
of the benefits.
Hydrogen, benefits of hydrogen. You can see here briefly, trucks are in development, buses, trains. Since 2 years ago in Germany, are running a small train. And very recently, the Japanese Toyota Hitachi announced the development of the similar trains with hydrogen. Talgo from Spain, Siemens 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. And if we see at the maritime applications, it's a big passenger ship for 900 passengers and 500 members of the crew, running 100% with liquid hydrogen. Liquid hydrogen was used with the rockets Ariane from Europe, or the Saturn, which put the man on the Earth 50 years ago. And very recently also the Airbus has shown that zero emissions airplanes with turbofans or turbojets or Delta running all with hydrogen, that maybe 10 years will be available and will help also to have a cleaner environment and all running with hydrogen fuel. But our big challenge is to have cheaper mobility and affordable for people like in India, Latin America, China, many places. For example, the 2- and 3-wheeler, and we are thinking and working also in this. Finally, I don't know how much time I have, Stefania.
Don't worry.
No, don't worry. So I can read this, or I can try to share with you this. We must be capable to integrate and to have the synergy between the wind parks and solar for the distributed energy management in each village, town, city, having firm electricity, hydrogen fuel and heat, and to think always in the local production of fresh food and in greenhouses, and the availability of clean water, which is another of the big challenges of many, many places of the world. We need to improve the local economy, promoting the social inclusion and even through sustainable employees. The sun is shining for everybody, the same the wind, and the grass and trees can grow everywhere if we put water, water them regularly. And our commitment is to satisfy the different energetic services by means of the inagotables. And finally, well, everybody must live with dignity, freedom, and enjoying with the creation. And to conclude, I have final 2 dreams. The renewable energies, especially hydrogen, must be for the service of everybody, and not only for few, in particular for the more poor people and more people who require assistance. And each Mariapolis, small cities dispersed in the 5 continents, which main law is the reciprocal love, must convert in true lies with the message of the Laudato Si. And finally, I want to remember O Sole Mio as the hymn for the energy. My origin from my mother is from Sorrento, but this we try to spread all over the world in any world conference or conference on hydrogen. We speak or we try to sing this very, very beautiful song. And finally, I want to say again, thank you very much to the Movimiento Popolari, to the people who helped us, like Nuncio Monsignor Sherry, who helped us to have a private audience with Pope Francesco, 7th of February of this year, the president, honorary president, the representative from Italy, me, myself, other member of the International Association for Hydrogen Energy. Thank you very much.
Grazie infinite, professor Bolcic, e in particolare grazie per aver...
So we should like to thank Professor Bolcic and thank you for changing the language at the very last minute, because he was supposed to speak Spanish and then he accepted to speak English. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. There may be many gestures and actions to safeguard the creation. John Mundell is environmental counselor for Mundell Associated, a society for water resources, headquartered in Indianapolis. This is a geologist, engineer with 40 years of experience of consultancy on thousands of environmental projects. Amongst his commitments, his commitment at the workplace. Let's listen to him to understand how daily practice can change workplaces and bring about social changes. Over to you, Professor Mundell.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here to participate with all of you in this conference on the impact that Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si has had and will have on our treatment and care of the earth. Today, I will speak on the topic of the business enterprise and its role in bringing about an integral ecology. For the last 40 years, I have been an environmental scientist and engineer who has directly witnessed the terrible impacts of industrialization on our planet. Contaminated lands and waters, sick children caused by poor air and water quality near their neighborhoods, dirty air that has caused asthma, fish kills in rivers. I have also experienced the joy that comes with cleaning up thousands of properties throughout the world and helping to restore the planet. I know from this work that it is possible to reverse the degradation that has happened if there is the willpower to do it. For the last 25 years of those years, I've been a social entrepreneur, running a small environmental consulting business as part of the large global network of companies dedicated to creating a more just economy. During this time, this network of businesses brought about many transformational changes within many of the communities, where many small actions by small businesses improved both the environment and the social ecology. With small businesses making up more than 98% of all enterprises in the world, this gives us hope that positive change can happen. Today, I want to emphasize 3 aspects that are highlighted in Laudato Si and how those can be viewed from a business enterprise standpoint. Number 1, how we are all interconnected with all life everywhere on the planet. Number 2, how the development of deep relationships can build stronger communities motivated by gratuity and reciprocity. And finally, number 3, how our choice to use only what is needed recognizes the limited nature of our resources and the positive impact the business enterprise can have in creating a sustainable future. I believe these three elements offer businesses a roadmap to transformational change that allows the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor to be heard and addressed within normal business operations and activities. We are all connected, business as part of creation. One of the key themes within Laudato Si that Pope Francis returns to many times throughout the document is the idea of how everything on the planet is interconnected. The cities, the forests, the oceans, rural communities, the air, businesses, everything. One of the greatest challenges for business enterprises and especially entrepreneurs to understand is this heartfelt conviction that they are part of something beyond just the day-to-day operations of the company, and that what they do can make a big difference. Why is this important? Without this deep felt connection to everything outside of themselves, there is no apparent motivation to be concerned about the way the business is run. The older classic business model is a selfish one, concerning itself only with making a profit and satisfying shareholders, many times at the expense of employees, the local and global communities, and the environment. The new and improved business model in tune with Laudato Si values people, planet, and profit, three bottom line focus, with profit seen only as a means of achieving social good, not as an end in itself. The business owner may ask, what impact can my small business really have on the quality of life on Earth? To the extent he or she feels when something happens to one person or one part of the planet, it also affects me and my company, then they might also feel that their contribution can make a big difference. When someone or something becomes negatively impacted and harmed, everything around them also suffers. For example, a burning forest, a contaminated stream, a strip mine mountain. All of these have consequences, often for those most vulnerable who pay the price for these kind of damages. Today, we see daily how global environmental and climate change impacts significantly impact business. Widespread forest fires, massive flooding, frequent hurricanes, the cause and spread of COVID-19. These significant disruptions can change how the business owner views these events and their own responsibility in contributing to them. This is perhaps the first step in the ecological conversion that Pope Francis calls us all to undergo. A recognition that the common good of the planet is something we all contribute to and need to work for, and that what we do does matter. Everything is a gift, business as communion. Laudato Si has increased our awareness that care for nature is part of the lifestyle, which includes the capacity for living together and communion. Laudato Si reminds us that creation can only be understood as a gift from the outstretched hand of the Father of all, and as a reality illuminated by the love which calls us together into universal communion. And as part of creation, we are linked together by unseen bonds, and we form a universal family, a sublime communion which fills us with sacred, affectionate, and humble respect. Living for communion in business means seeing the world through a new set of glasses and recognizing the potential for deep relationships within the company and its supporters, for example, the employees, the vendors, the clients. At the local level, the local geographic level, near the business's neighborhood, the city in which the business operates, and the other surrounding businesses, and also at the global level with those who are on other continents, the supply chains, and those in need. This recognition creates an awareness of the significant role that even small businesses can play in a global movement to revitalize communities and protect the planet. A business lifestyle of communion encourages each one to go the extra mile with those that are in contact with the company each day. In doing this, we should, as Pope St. Pope John Paul II has suggested, think of our brothers and sisters as those who are part of me. This makes us able to share their joys and sufferings, to sense their desires and attend to their needs, to see what is positive in others, to welcome it as a gift from God, as a gift for me. In doing this, a business enterprise with Laudato Si values experiences everyone and everything it encounters, even difficult ones, as a gift. Competitors become friends who push us to be better. Failures are seen as lessons learned to improve quality. Late payments from clients come as reminders to improve communications. When this kind of gift awareness begins to take root, an atmosphere of gratuity and reciprocity grows, and a culture of giving becomes the norm, and we begin to accept and embrace the entire world as Laudato Si would say, a sacrament of communion, as a way of sharing with God and our neighbors on a global scale. In business, when we are authentically open to universal communion, this sense of fraternity excludes nothing and no one. This is an important point because one of the distinguishing characteristics of the business intent on living out the values of Laudato Si is the fact that behind each moment of each business day, the business owner and employees try to live with a continuous awareness of the other person in order to create and maintain a workplace and business of communion. There are many, many business owners in the world and many socially responsible companies that do good works and have good hearts. But that alone for a business based on Laudato Si is not enough. Pope Francis reminds us the human person grows more, matures more, and is sacrificed more to the extent that he or she enters into relationships, going out from themselves to live in communion with God, with others, and with all creatures. Practical examples of this for a business takes many forms. Purchasing all supplies it needs from only
John,
local vendors.
sorry, 1 minute, only 1 minute.
Okay, even if they are more expensive, contributing to community-wide efforts to enhance the local environment with community cleaning events and tree plantings, and support for locally grown produce. It may also mean participating in business green programs that reduce the company's carbon footprint, minimize waste generation and water usage, and support the 7 R's of sustainability: rethink, refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose, recycle, and rot. Finally, when we see the business as a sustainable partner, Laudato Si reminds us of our obligation to protect the planet for the sake of those who will come after us. Once we start to think about the kind of world we are leaving to future generations, we look at things differently. We realize that the world is a gift which have been freely received and must be shared with others. There are many ways a business enterprise can operate to encourage long-term sustainability of our natural resources and to minimize climate impacts. A simple list of questions can provide insight into the direction the company can take to improve its environmental footprint. How has the company operations affected the natural habitat? Is the air clean to breathe and the water clean to drink? Has the company enhanced the natural environment or destroyed it? What can be done to mitigate any negative impacts? Finally, a company must distinguish itself not by simply following the minimum acceptable practices for environmental stewardship, but by determining what is unique in its contribution to the planet. This is often dictated by the company's geographic location, its product or service, and the desires of workers. Taking the initiative in pro-environmental activities is always positive. What is important is to create something unique that the business benefits the environment, it motivates its employees, and sets the company apart. So finally, the kinds of environmental activities practiced by each company will be dependent on their size and their financial resources. Large companies have all the resources needed and they have dedicated full-time professional staff. Small companies, however, often do not have this luxury and must find simple ways to address sustainability concerns within limited budgets and no professional staff. What is important here is this: action. In exploring new ways of doing business and incorporating these ideas into ordinary day-to-day operations, a company can realize the ideals of Laudato Si and become an active participant in answering the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Thank you.
Grazie infinite, John.
Thanks a lot, John. So this is the end of this session. So a special thanks go to our speakers. Well, it seems to me that in every one of them, we've seen their love for our common home, and for all of us who are the inhabitants of this common home. But they've also provided us with the food for thought and with the concrete responses. These are seeds of hope that make our dream come true, to relieve the human family of poverty, of environmental degradation, using all the means possible, starting off from the responsibility and the daily effort made by each one of us. Thank you very much to you all.